Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily. Remembering George Floyd 1 year after his death. We speak to his family on how they're memorializing his legacy.
We need change.
And an exclusive interview with a mother who accuses Derek Chauvin of using excessive force on her 12-year-old child with autism.
But he had placed his knee on his back and close to his neck, if not on his neck.
Plus, defense attorneys for an Iowa farm worker accused of murder call for justice for victim Mollie Tibbetts, but also suggest police misconduct.
The confrontation continued until it was put in my client's head, perhaps you blacked out.
And the sister of the last person to see alive the missing wife of millionaire real estate heir testifies at the Robert Durst murder trial.
She was told by Susan Berman that she had to go through Susan in order to question Bobby.
Law and Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmire along with Terri Austin. May 25th marks 1 year since George Floyd was murdered. His family and loved ones are using the day to remember his legacy. Video of the 46-year-old's death was seen around the world. 1 year later, former officer Derek Chauvin stands convicted and 3 more officers are awaiting trial. On Tuesday, the Floyd family met with President Biden and members of Congress. They were hoping the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act would have been passed by May 25th. The bill would ban chokeholds and no-knock warrants at the federal level and create a national database of police misconduct. The House passed the bill, but it appears to have stalled in the Senate over a provision to end qualified immunity for officers.
We need to be able to set standard procedures in place, just like we need meaningful legislation when they signed that George Floyd Policing Act. We need it on Biden's desk. The Senate, we need to get this taken care of. Because just like Gianna said, your dad is going to do what?
Derek Chauvin is set to be sentenced next month. A mother is speaking out only to Law and Crime about a use of force incident involving the former Minneapolis police officer. Law and Crime senior investigative reporter Adam Klasfeld is here with the exclusive interview.
Thank you for having me, Brian. This interview came out when we had learned, this is for my podcast Objections, we air on Tuesday. And when we learned, when this mother reached out to me and told me her story, and we planned to air on this date, she was just bowled over with the significance of the fact that there were what she called some haunting parallels. When Derek Chauvin had a knee on her 12-year-old child's back, the child, she said, was having trouble breathing. What made the mother step forward is, of course, after Derek Chauvin's conviction, there was another federal civil rights case, one of the cases involving George Floyd's murder, but another case involving a 14-year-old. So when she learned another 14-year-old was accused of, that Derek Chauvin was accused of these actions against a 14-year-old, she came forward to us with her story and brought a new dimension of the case in that her child has autism. And this is, of course, coming in the context of a nationwide conversation about mental health and policing. The Senate Judiciary Committee had a hearing of it just 2 days after Derek Chauvin's conviction, talking about police responses to mental health crises. There is a police report that the mother shared with us that shows that Derek Chauvin, who wrote the report, was responding to a mental health crisis. And she wanted, in coming to us with this story, to shine a light on this particular issue about mental health and policing.
Now, Adam, I definitely want to continue to talk more about this, but first, let's take a listen to what the mother had to say.
Even though the reason for my call was serious, and when he was down on my child's back, it was like I was pleading with him, and the way he turned and looked at me and said, "This is what we're doing." And then like I said, I'm fiery. I don't back down very easily. And I felt afraid for my life and certainly for my kid's life at that moment because of the way that he was responding to my words.
Now, Adam, I understand she hasn't spoken to the Minnesota Attorney General's office or federal authorities about this incident. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but tell us a little bit more as to why she's coming forward now.
So part of the reason was when this was happening, as I mentioned, this was a mental health crisis and involving her child. There were one among many involving her child who suffers from autism, has bipolar disorder, and other diagnoses. So she was dealing with a lot of things. And after the video of George Floyd came out, she came across what is known as a blue card that police distribute to crime victims. And it set her on this search. She was more than troubled by what had happened to George Floyd. She learned about what happened to the 14-year-old actually through the George Floyd case when that originally came out. And it set her upon the search. She obtained the police report. She requested the body cam video. The Minneapolis Police Department told her they did not have the video. We're trying to get some answers as to why that's the case.
Exactly. So, thank you, Adam, for that exclusive. Former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was convicted of unintentional murder in Floyd's death. Law&Crime's Angenette Levy spoke with the Floyd family's lawyer about his upcoming sentencing.
Yeah, Brian, and I asked Ben Crump exactly what sentence he and George Floyd's family believed that Chauvin should receive.
Whatever sentence George Floyd would have received had the roles been reversed and George Floyd put his knee on Derek Chauvin's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds while he begged for his life, well, then that's the same sentence that Derek Chauvin should receive. It has always been about equal justice for us because we are trying to send the message that all marginalized minorities in America want. The only thing Black people want in America is equal justice under the law.
Derek Chauvin could get as long as 40 years in prison. When he is sentenced next month, he can face that much time because Judge Cahill found that there were aggravating factors that existed when George Floyd died. Brian?
Thanks, Angenette. Let's bring in co-host Terri Austin with us as well. Terri, we know that Judge Cahill can go above the statutory limit for a first offender, but how far above do you think he'll go?
You know, Brian, I think he's going to go as far as he possibly can. We know that Chauvin was convicted of all 3 counts in connection with, second and third degree murder and manslaughter. And the video itself was particularly disturbing. And I think that's going to affect the judge. And also, as we know, there were aggravating factors here. We know that George Floyd was in a vulnerable position because he was handcuffed and in the prone position. We think that this was, and I think the judge is going to think that this was particularly cruel, that he, went over his authority and he abused it, and this was in front of children. So I definitely think that he is going to get as much as he can.
Absolutely. In an earlier report, Judge Cahill found 4 of the 5 aggravating circumstances put forward by the prosecution, so he has the right to do that. Angenette, how does Crump feel about the federal case going ahead of the state case against the other 3 officers?
I asked him about that, and he didn't really seem to mind. He said that historically speaking, the constitutional violations have really been determined by the federal courts. And those are the courts, the federal ones, that have actually convicted police officers of crimes in relation to use of force and excessive force. So he seemed to be okay with it.
Yeah, seems like more familiar ground for him when that's the ground that typically prosecutes and also convicts officers. He'd probably be happy to see that make it easier for the state case. Thank you both for your contribution. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, inside the courtroom of our 2 live trials, the testimony and evidence you don't want to miss. But first, our special report on the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's death continues. How his family is remembering their brother, their friend, and their loved one next. Welcome back. 1 year after George Floyd's death, his family is continuing their advocacy. I spoke with Floyd's brother about a new organization he's starting in Floyd's memory called We Are Floyd.
It's been powerful. It's been an emotional roller coaster.
For Terrence Floyd, losing his older brother last May ignited a new passion.
Before I was upset, I was angry, I was frustrated. Now I'm just eager, optimistic, ready to move, ready to get this We Are Floyd off the ground to better our community and our culture.
Terri says We Are Floyd will focus on mental health care and financial literacy for inner city youth. The nonprofit is separate from the George Floyd Memorial Foundation, started last year by members of Floyd's family.
The officer took a great man, a great father, a great brother.
He always told me I had a voice. He always wanted to encourage me to talk and be more outgoing than I already am.
Terri says the death of his brother pushed him to use his own voice to fight for social justice.
I hear people saying modern day martyr, but I look at him as my hero.
Terri says hopeful reform will come through in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act.
I know it's going to get passed regardless, because not only us, but they see we need change. His sacrifice changed this world, changed mine. Not just as his little brother, but me as a man.
Communities around the country are kneeling for 9 minutes and 29 seconds in George Floyd's honor. Angenette Levy is back with more from the attorney for George Floyd's family.
Yeah, Brian, Ben Crump and I really talked to him really about what this last year has been like and what he'd like to see happen moving forward.
I think about all the progress that was made in that year, but I have to reflect on all the progress that needs to be made to prevent the unnecessary, the unjustifiable, and the unconstitutional killings of Black people in America by the police that has happened since George Floyd was tortured to death on May 25th, 2020.
Those feelings stated by Terrence Floyd, that they would like to see the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act passed by both houses of Congress and signed into law. The legislators who are actually working on that bill said that they released a statement saying that they are working towards some meaningful progress and a compromise on this issue. Brian?
Thanks, Angenette. Let's bring back co-host Terri Austin. Terri, at this point, do you think the federal George Floyd bill is a question of if or when it will pass?
I certainly hope it's a question of when. We know that it's already passed as far as the House is concerned. It's the Senate that we have to be concerned about. But it is a very important bill because it does put some uniformity behind the laws. It's going to eliminate certain things. It's going to make sure that there's a limit on unnecessary use of force. It's going to limit and restrict the use of no-knock warrants and chokeholds, and it's going to make sure that there's a collection of data as it relates to complaints against police officers. It's going to enhance training, and it's going to give the Department of Justice more power as far as subpoenas are concerned. So I do think it's very important, and I am hoping that the Senate will pass it and that it will become legislation.
Yeah, the one thing that seems to be hanging up the Senate is the issue of qualified immunity. We'll see how that passes through, if they can make a compromise or it goes through as is. Angenette, did Benjamin Crump give you an impression of how he thought the bill could impact policing in this country?
Yeah, he said that he basically thinks that that could be a big step toward ensuring that people of color are treated equally under the law by the police. And he believes it really has some teeth to it. And he said that's all that African Americans in this country want. He said that they want to be treated equally under the law. And that's all they're asking for. It's a very simple request, and he hopes that that will be done.
Just looking for equal justice, not more justice. Makes sense. Thank you both. Coming up on Law&Crime Daily, is cocaine to blame for a missing woman? Why Robert Durst's defense team is pointing the finger at a drug to explain why his wife disappeared decades ago. Plus, the evidence of Mollie Tibbetts' murder. Hear what the defense of an Iowa farm worker accused of killing the college student is now presenting to a jury. Ahead. We're back. Defense attorneys for an Iowa farm worker charged with murdering a college student, Mollie Tibbetts, are beginning their case with a DNA expert. Angenette Levy is back with the testimony.
Yeah, Brian, Dr. Michael Spence examined the DNA test results from Christian Behavior Rivera's vehicle, the trunk of his vehicle. And Dr. Spence says that he has a different interpretation of the results from the crime lab employees who analyzed that data. He focused on DNA mixtures found in the trunk of the black Chevy Malibu. He said there were 4 areas of blood, and some of the DNA actually came from an unidentified female and an unidentified male. Neither one was Mollie Tibbetts or Christian Behavior Rivera. Spence said no other DNA samples were provided to the lab to compare the bloodstains, so we simply don't know who that DNA came from or when and how it was left there.
There was a clear indication there was female DNA within there once again, we don't want to confuse it. That might have been Miss Tibbetts. We're talking about a female other than Miss Tibbetts.
You have no dispute that Mollie Tibbetts' blood and DNA was on the trunk seal of the black Chevy Malibu that's at issue in this case?
No, I don't dispute that at all.
And Spence said in his review of the information, he did not see any contamination issues from the DNA samples taken from the trunk of the car. The jury also heard from the mother of Christian Behavior Rivera's daughter, that's his ex-girlfriend. She testified that he had never been violent toward her. Brian?
Thanks, Angenette. Terri, so there's an unidentified man and unidentified woman in that trunk in some way, shape, or form. The defense is obviously arguing something. Could they argue that the defendant only buried Mollie Tibbetts and didn't kill her? Could that work?
You know, they could try to make that argument, but I don't think it's going to work. Look, we know that Mollie Tibbetts' blood was in the area of the trunk, but we also know that no one else followed Mollie. No one else said that they fought with Mollie. No one else took the authorities to her body. So I think the blood that is unidentified as a male and female in the trunk could belong to a family member. So I don't think that argument that the defense might, put forth is going to prevail.
Now, Angenette, as a character witness, how was the testimony of the mother of the defendant's child?
It's really hard to know how that will play with the jury. She was very well-spoken, but, she dated him. This wasn't somebody that they have a child together. It's the mother of his child. This isn't somebody that he happened upon on the street, as is alleged in this case. So we'll just have to wait and see how the jury feels about it, when and if they reach a verdict.
Yeah, and then of course they'll be charged as to what an interested witness is. The mother of his child is probably a very interested witness because if he's incarcerated, can't really help out financially or at least be in the child's life. So we'll see how that plays out. When we come back, the sister of Kathy Durst's friend testifies about the last time they saw the missing Miss Durst. Welcome back. Prosecutors are presenting evidence they say ties the murder of Robert Durst's best friend to the disappearance of his first wife, Kathy. The real estate heir is accused of murdering Susan Berman back in December of 2000. Prosecutors allege Durst shot Berman because she knew too much about the disappearance of Durst's first wife, Kathy, in 1982. The last person to see Kathy alive was Goberta Nejame, who passed away in 2015. Her sister testified in her place. On cross, the defense asked her about Kathy's alleged cocaine use.
When I used it, and most people around me, including Goberta, used it, when we were going out.
Going out partying.
Dancing in the clubs.
And you didn't consider yourself a cocaine addict.
Not at all.
But you used cocaine.
Yeah.
Being addicted to cocaine or the use of cocaine. There's two different things.
Yes.
Right?
Correct.
But cocaine can affect the way a person works. Right?
If they use it to excess, yes.
Sure. And if you stay out late one evening dancing, using cocaine, the next morning you might not be the best at work. Right?
That could be true.
On redirect, prosecutors asked about Kathy's demeanor before she disappeared.
When you interacted with Kathy on January 31st, 1982, you had some experience using cocaine yourself, right?
Yes.
You've been around other people who've been using cocaine yourself?
Yes.
Did it appear to you that Kathy was acting the way she was because she was high on cocaine or because she was upset about a fight she just had with her husband?
I don't think that's within her expertise. I object.
Overruled.
I did not believe Kathy was under the influence of cocaine when she came to that house.
And
Basis of opinion.
Overruled.
why do you think that?
Because cocaine makes you happy, and she wasn't happy.
Terri, at times the lawyers were hostile to the witnesses, to each other's, sometimes even the judge. How is this trial being handled?
You know, Brian, I understand that sometimes it's difficult to run a courtroom, but this is something I've never seen. Judge Wyndham really has lost control of the courtroom. He allows the attorneys to argue over each other and even argue with the witnesses, and especially as it relates to John Lewin, the prosecutor. I definitely think he believes he's the judge in this case because he oftentimes interjects. Even if he hasn't made an objection, he just starts speaking out. And Judge Wyndham oftentimes lets him do that.
Now, Terri, fireworks are great for TV, but is it muddying the waters of this case, potentially making it tougher for the prosecution?
I think it is, Brian. There are so many issues here, and there's so many people involved in this case, and they're spending so much time on little issues like this phone call. Now, definitely the defense thinks this phone call that allegedly we have Susan making on behalf of Kathy and impersonating her, but they spent so much time going back and forth today. I think it really lost the jury.
Yeah, I think they're going to lose him on some of these finer points. Thank you very much, Terri, for that. And thank you for joining us here at Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.